What is it going to take for the Mercedes-Benz Club to survive? So before I made this video, I kind of quietly agreed with my friend Ruben, who publishes The Star, that I would, keep it professional. But there are some things that I want to talk about with MBCA and how the club has actually improved in the last 2 years. Because, if you guys remember 3 or 4 years ago, I made some videos about the MBCA that really upset a lot of people because it was just too much, and people in this world are very sensitive. We live in a very sensitive society. I can hear Donald Trump saying it now. Everybody is very sensitive now. But, I mean, it's just the truth. The truth is that we live in a very sensitive society, and if you go out and you just say things like Mercedes brand new EVs are trash and no one wants them, there are a lot of butthurt engineers that will be like, but one of the reasons that I think it's very important to make this video is because I learned this morning that Mercedes is canceling their own Classics magazine, which was published quarterly. Now, we don't know why they're doing this, but the thing that some people are speculating is that there's limited and no interest in the new Mercedes product. And so it's become sort of a cliche now to say that Mercedes is coming up with new and interesting electric vehicles. And in fact, the whole EV program is like, I don't know, it's just gone down the toilet, I think, because Mercedes seems to understand now that people want their V8 supercharged AMG cars, and they're willing to settle for their 6-cylinder cars, and their 4-cylinder cars are widely regarded as trash. And, Mercedes should have really never made cars like the CLA, but they sold them so that they could take advantage of people. There's a whole grift around modern luxury cars, and we'll say like people in groups that have had to work very hard to be successful. And so some of these people might include women, minorities, people from poorer communities. And so they've been sort of enticed by Mercedes to think that buying a CLA is a symbol of success. And really, Mercedes is just making a cash grab at these people, trying to sell them the idea of a Mercedes when in reality they're buying something like a Nissan. So we have to ask ourselves, what is it going to take for MBCA to survive? Why? Because MBCA does a great job promoting the existence and survival of real Mercedes enthusiast cars that people care about. And in this umbrella of Mercedes enthusiast cars, I can tell you what there isn't. I can't tell you what there is. I can't tell you what is special to you. But an MBCA member is probably, if they're into newer cars, they probably have big displacement cars like an S-Class or an AMG. They probably have something that is special, even now is special, like an S63 or an SL63 or a Black Series car. Something that you just can't go buy, like you have to look hard for one. Maybe they're into the G-Class or something. If you're into older cars, like any older Mercedes is now considered an enthusiast car, but they're enthusiast cars for different reasons, and it's because the Mercedes brand has been more aligned with self-sufficiency and intelligence and, preferring a long-term product over a short-term product. You could chalk it up to all of these little nuances. But the reason that I think MBCA has had such a hard time surviving is because the club really didn't do a great job either promoting the real enthusiast cars, and instead they sort of were like a headless chicken and didn't know which way to go. But there was also some poor leadership. Our previous not regional director, although he was pretty bad too, our previous executive director would absolutely not take a phone call or an email from anybody in the club at all. Like, getting to talk to him, it would have been easier for me to get Joe Biden's medical records than it would to get a phone call with Mike. And even when we were kicking butt with the online with the technical seminars online during COVID when I would stack my dining room table full of parts. Nobody could get a hold of Mike. And what's the reason for that? It's because Mike was too busy running a second business. And so for something like 5 years, while MBCA was declining and we should have been trying to solve this problem of membership, we had a guy who was basically using his salary to fund a magazine. Like a tourism magazine for Colorado Springs, which I thought was really weird. But I guess you've got to have job insurance when the organization that you're helping to run into the ground eventually takes a dump. So now we have a new executive director, and I think she's pretty amazing. Her name is Katie, and Katie has gone out and did what every executive director should have done. She went out and she bought an old Mercedes. So she bought an 81 300 TD, which I would say is pretty left field, because most people, if they want a 300 TD, they're going to go and bring a trailer and just buy a car that's got a high profile, and it's got to be an 85, and it's got to be, it can't have a blue interior. And so she bought a first-year production car from a guy who had a pretty sizable Mercedes collection. It was kind of a hush-hush deal, and she actually uses the car. So she's familiarizing herself with the car. Now, who would have thought that an MBCA executive director would be interested in a 45-year-old car? But I think somebody actually cares about their job for once. So the other big problem we're looking at is I think that a lot of people who are actually into Mercedes, not into car club culture, but into Mercedes, sort of like me, are introverts. Ever since COVID, socialization is off the table. It's not interesting to us. Anytime now that I socialize with other car people, I'm like, what do they want from me? Because a lot of them want something from me. I don't know what it is. Maybe they want to send their car to my shop, which is great. I appreciate it. But sometimes they just want hours of free technical advice. Sometimes they want me to talk to their mechanic for them, which is annoying. If your mechanic's running a shop, he needs to be good at his job. Maybe I wouldn't have to work so hard. I don't know. I mean, it's one thing when you're reaching out to a mechanic who's working on one of your customers' cars, but it's another thing when somebody just wants hours of technical advice. So one of the things that I learned early on about MBCA and its membership problem is that they also relied very heavily on a model where they recruit people using Mercedes dealerships, which dealerships are a very busy place. You go to a dealership, everybody there is either they're either running around like a headless chicken, or they're just a bunch of NPCs in the service department sitting around doing nothing. And you see this, like, there's some dealerships where the service department is really busy. There's some dealerships that have created a very bad reputation for themselves, and they're absolutely dead. And the business isn't just dead. The people running the place are also brain dead, And without going into too much detail, I'd like to say that probably, I don't personally know any people like that, but I've heard about these kinds of dealerships. So the next problem that you have to ask is, how do we recruit huge amounts of members? Well, Hedary Insurance would be a great recruitment tool. Bring a Trailer would be a great recruiting partner. MB Market, a great recruiting partner. How do we forge relationships with these businesses so that they can feed members to us? I'm not really sure, but I will say that the data exists and we need to get our hands on it somehow. Like, this data of who owns what Mercedes needs to be harvested so that we can ping these people via MBCA and actually get them to check their email and sign up for our club. It's a complicated story because MBCA is the only Mercedes club in the United States that is publishing an actual print magazine about the cars. MBCA is the only organization that has a sizable amount of Mercedes owners so that we could actually lobby for our parts interests. MBCA is also the only organization that has events exclusively for Mercedes Benz owners, which, if you're me, some of those events, if they're technical events especially, are interesting. When they get to be these expensive social events, I could care less. But the technical stuff is very interesting. You know, there's another huge problem too, and that's age gap. And so age gap is a tough one because younger people typically are more interested in acquiring knowledge if they're into Mercedes. And most people who are in their 60s and 70s today, I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of them are done acquiring knowledge. And there seems to be a proliferation of these people when you go to things like a country club social. There just seem to be a bunch of fat, dumb, rich, happy old people. And that sort of thing is not attractive to somebody like me who always wants to acquire new knowledge. You know, I can't help that about myself. And I think a lot of us are like that. Anyway, if you are not an MBCA member, go back and look at our website and see if the proposition appeals to you, because there's not a great proposition, but there's a good proposition, I think. And I think that just the availability of a Mercedes club in the United States where we have our own publication and where we can actually communicate with other owners is a good starting point. And then if enough people join with enough ideas, we can actually make the thing better. All right, I'll see you in the next video, guys. Enjoy enjoy working on and learning more about your classic Mercedes.